Good morning. Welcome to Carmel Valley Community Chapel on this bright, sunny, it seems like a summer's day. It's wonderful to have our guest musicians, Liberta Laral and Tammy Hall, with us this morning. And I appreciate Liberta letting me accompany her for two of her pieces. It's always fun to work with you, Liberta. And then you'll get a real jazz artist when Tammy steps up to the plate. I also want to thank Jody Parsons for being our liturgist this morning. Thank you, Jody. And Christy Clark, and with some help from Wayne, I'm sure, for our refreshments this morning. So please do join us in Fellowship Hall after the service for some wonderful refreshments and, as always, great conversation. At this point in the service, I invite all who are able to please stand and join responsively in the call to worship printed in the bulletin.
Then I was standing on the highest mountain of them all.
And round beneath me was the whole hoop of the world. And while I stood there, I saw more than I can tell. And I understood more than I saw.
For I was seeing in the sacred manner the shape of all things of the Spirit.
And the shapes as they must live together like one being. And I saw that the sacred hoop of my people was one of many hoops that make one circle.
Wide as daylight and starlight, and in the center grew one mighty flowering tree, to shelter all the children of one mother and one father. And I saw that it was holy.
Let us join together in singing our opening hymn, which is number 145 in the hymnal, Morning Has Broken. Please be seated. At this point in our service, I invite all of us to enter into a time of silent prayer and meditation together. I invite you to take this time to center your hearts, your minds, your bodies, and your spirits into this here and now that we are creating together. Let us join together now in silent meditation. Our reading this morning is a very familiar one. It should be extra familiar because we heard it last Sunday as well. This reading is a conclusion to the flood narrative in Genesis chapter 6 through 9. This is a long story, and when you read it, you can't help but notice how repetitive the story is, how it says the same thing twice, and sometimes there are differences in the repetition. So this is actually, the whole flood narrative is actually two different flood stories that were spliced together. They come from two different sources, two different historical times. Even in today's short section of this reading, you will hear some repetition that may seem to you to be a little bit unnecessary. But it's because these two stories were not harmonized into one, but rather they were interposed, spliced into one another without much alteration, as if the redactor was saying, both these stories are important to remember. So let's take a listen to our familiar reading today from Genesis.
A reading from Genesis 9, verses 8 through 17. And God said to Noah and to his family with him, "And I am about to establish my covenant with you and your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the fowl and the cattle and every beast of the earth with you, and all that have come out of the ark, every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you, that never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I set between me and you and every living thing that is with you for everlasting generations. My bow I have set in the clouds to be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth, and so, when I send clouds over the earth, the bow will appear in the cloud. Then I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters will no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be in the clouds, and I will see it, to remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures, all flesh that is on the earth." And God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." Here ends the reading.
With a reading like that in which God makes a covenant with all living creatures, I just thought we had to sing God of the Sparrow, God of the Whale. So I invite you to remain seated and join in singing hymn number 122. God of the sparrow, God of the wind, God of the swirling stars, what does the creature say? Oh, Well, just like last year around this time, this past month or so, we've had some interesting weather patterns, some atmospheric rivers parked above us, some trees blown down, some electricity disappearing for days before it's restored, a few homes damaged. Last year, our atmospheric rivers almost turned Monterey Peninsula into an island. So it is indeed wonderful after the storm to get this rainbow in the clouds. You gotta love the rainbow. Rabbi Noah Arno wrote about the many different interpretations of the rainbow that Jewish rabbis have given over the centuries. In his essay called The Jewish Rainbow Connection. And the first interpretation comes from a 12th century French rabbi named Joseph Shore, who says a rainbow is not just a rainbow. Rather, it's God showing God's self. And the rabbi, in this case, based that interpretation on a verse from Ezekiel, where in Ezekiel 1:28 it is said, quote, "Like the appearance of the bow which shines in the cloud on a day of rain, was the appearance of the semblance of the presence of God," end quote. Other rabbis point out that it isn't the rainbow itself that's the symbol, but rather it's the fact that the rainbow is seen in the clouds. Originally, suggests Rabbi Isaac Caro, a 15th to 16th century Sephardic scholar, rainbows couldn't be seen from the earth because they were obscured by thick clouds. And it was these heavy, thick clouds that produced the flood, the great flood rains. But after the great flood, Caro posits, God thinned out the clouds, rendering them incapable of producing floods of this magnitude and allowing rainbows to be seen. So the symbol is not just the rainbow and our ability to see it, but the way the clouds have changed. In another interpretation of the rainbow's significance, Maimonides, a 13th century Spanish rabbi, suggests it is a bow, as in a bow and arrow, that is no longer aimed at the earth. See, the big great flood was God taking aim at the earth. But after the flood, when God says it's not going to happen again, the bow is pointing away from the earth and no longer has a string or arrows in it. So it's a sign of a ceasefire, if you will. Something we're praying for a little more of in our world these days. Arno goes on to say that other Jewish scholars have seen the rainbow as a different kind of peace symbol. One medieval commentator saw the rainbow as a combination of fire and water, coexisting in perfect peace in the natural world. A more modern approach, Arno says, comes from Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, 19th century Germany, who suggests that each of the different colors of the rainbow represents a different kind of person. And thus the rainbow becomes a symbol for both diversity and unity. Another rabbi, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, a prominent American-born Orthodox rabbi in Israel, writes, noting that the rainbow is a half of a circle. This rabbi says the rainbow is a half picture half of an image, lacking a second half to complete the circle of wholeness. Because God can pledge not to destroy humanity. But since God created humanity with freedom of choice, God cannot guarantee that humanity will not destroy itself. That is to say, that God has done God's part in the rainbow. But for the rainbow to be a whole circle, humanity has to do, we have to do our part. I really like that. Finally, Rabbi Arno, who's compiled all these different interpretations, says that for him, the rainbow is about seeing. And he quotes St. Kermit the Frog, who sang, "Rainbows are visions, but also illusions, and rainbows have nothing to hide." He goes on to say that a rainbow is the refraction of light through water droplets, breaking up the white light so that we can see the various spectrums that are always there in the visible spectrum of white light. A rainbow allows us to see something that we cannot usually see. And we see a rainbow, or when we see a rainbow, it is a liminal moment when the rain has ended, but the air is still damp with moisture, and we can sense both the rain and the sun together. He wraps it up by saying, "We've all had moments in our lives when suddenly we see more clearly, when the clouds in front of our eyes are lifted, and we can see not just black and white, but many shades of colors, nuance, maybe moral vision in our world. Used to be in white and black, good and evil, life and death, right or wrong, early in Genesis, through the stories of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. Suddenly, though, after the flood, the clouds lift, and both God and people can see colors they had never before seen. Suddenly they can see nuance, and people are no longer all good or all bad." I think that's a lovely interpretation, too. Now, the story of Noah's Ark and of the Great Flood is part of our cultural heritage in the church, in the synagogue, in Western culture, and even far beyond Western culture, because there are myths, stories of the Great Flood in so many cultures. This is a creation myth that has found various expressions in many diverse cultures, many diverse times and places. The story we read in the Bible was based on older stories from other cultures, one main example being the Gilgamesh epic. And 6th century BCE Israelites would have encountered the Gilgamesh epic and other stories from Sumeria and Akkadian literature in the exile in Babylon. But for us today, our understanding of the story, I would gather, was not based with any of those other myths in mind, but probably was shaped in our Sunday school experience when we were young and presented with a very, shall we say, simplistic interpretation of this story. And the one I remember from Sunday school was basically that God sent the flood because humans were so bad. I do not think that is the meaning of the myth. In all the various myths we have, or since I haven't read all, I will just say in most of the various creation myths that we have in our various cultures, there are stories about the flood being a time when either God or the gods had created creation, but they didn't do it quite right. And they had to kind of erase the chalkboard and start over again. So you could just as easily say that the problem wasn't that humanity was bad. It was that, God didn't get it right the first time. Because one of the things that happens in all these myths is that the second attempt goes a little bit better. As if, God is kind of learning how to do this. And in the story in Genesis, both before the flood narrative, before chapter 6, and after the flood has happened and the rainbow and the covenant have been revealed, the Bible says humanity does bad things. That hasn't changed after the flood. What has changed is God. God is different in the myth. And now God is going to remember the good. In spite of the fact that humanity is going to continue to do bad things, God is going to be a God of opportunities to start over, because God remembers the good. I think it's important that we know that in our Bible, in the great flood story, there is more than one story there. I think it's important that these two stories from different individuals, different communities, different historical times, different perspectives, were included as they were, without being melted into a single story. One source for the story is called the J source, and we just use the letter J. Scholars have used that letter J because the term that the J source uses, the term for God, begins with the Hebrew letter J. And it's often called the Yahwist. Other more contemporary scholars refer to this source as simply the storyteller. The other source is called the P source, the letter P, which stands for priest or priestly source. These two sources, this is coming from professor at McCormick Theological Seminary, Theodore Hibert. These two sources look back to Noah as their founding ancestor rather than Abraham. In the Genesis flood story, Noah and the flood become the defining moment in biblical history. I often encounter in theologies about the First Testament the importance of covenant, which is very important, and how it goes back to Abraham, which is true. But the covenant with Abraham was not the first covenant. That's not where covenant began. It begins with Noah. And we have two different sources that acknowledge that in the Bible. So the story itself of the Great Flood is diverse. The Bible has intentionally continued to include diverse stories without changing them to be one same story. Hebert writes, quote, "If we are to talk about the relationship between Israel in particular and humanity in general at the beginning of Genesis, it is only after the flood and not before it that humanity in its true breadth really comes into view. He goes on to say that, quote, the fundamental identity claim that Genesis authors make is that all other people, that is, all people who are not part of Israel, all other people are their relatives. And I think there is something in this revelation of being related to all humanity that is a vital part of the beginning of the covenant that God is establishing with humanity. And if you listened to the reading today, not just humanity, indeed with all creation, all living creatures, and even with the earth itself. You can't get much more inclusive. They didn't know about the multiverse back then. And this universal human relatedness theme of Noah and the flood is the one that carries the revelation of the beginning of covenantal history. In the flood story, let me back up. In the creation story we have Genesis 1, that creation myth ends with a blessing. You could actually say it begins and ends with a blessing, and the middle is a blessing too. Everything is declared good, and at the very end it is blessed. But what happens right after that is the second Genesis story. The second Genesis story begins in chapter 2 of Genesis, ends with a curse. Adam and Eve have done bad things. The land itself is now cursed because whenever human beings try to cultivate crops, up will come thorns and thistles and snakes and all other number of bad things and harmful things. And later in Genesis 4, Cain murders his brother and God makes the soil unproductive. And indeed in Genesis 6, God devastates all arable land, farmers, and livestock. That's a pretty big curse. And it is Noah and his family that usher in a new era of blessing and covenant, reversing the curse. And this happens literally at the end of the story. There's a reference in Genesis 5:29, which is the beginning, about Noah being born to free people from the soil's curse. And then in Genesis 8:20, Noah constructs, after landing on dry ground, so the flood is over, Noah constructs the first altar and offers sacrifice. And then is God's promise and guarantee never to do this again. And then in 9:20, Noah plants a vineyard, a symbol of the restoration of the fertility of the land. The curse has been reversed. So Genesis 1, creation myth, ends in blessing. Genesis chapter 2, creation myth, ends in curse. And the flood narrative, that is chapter 6, 7, 8, and 9, ends in blessing. There's a lovely interplay here in the Bible going on with these various narratives. And I believe that the flood narrative from Genesis is nothing less than the revelation of a universal human family to which we all belong, and the promise of renewal and restoration of all creation. Now, the first covenant, the one that we get in the Noah story, the first covenant with all creation was deemed so significant that Rabbinic Judaism would come to view that salvation is not exclusively reserved for Jews, but all the nations are included in the hope for salvation just by following the Noahic commandments. Now that's a very generous theology. They believe in salvation and being the chosen people, but salvation is not limited to them. It's opened up to everybody else. I wish that Christianity were that generous. And unfortunately, in many circles, it is not. And the other important thing that I take away from this is that this universal relatedness that is revealed in the covenant with Noah and with all creation does not in any way deny, negate, or try to ignore our differences. Very important example in Genesis comes later. Now, it has to do with the genealogy lists. Now, biblical genealogies are most frequently prescribed cure for insomnia, but they do, however, express a theology and function as a unifying force. Now, I will not read them for you today, don't worry, but I'm going to refer to them. Because just after the story of Noah and the flood, we come to chapter 10, and there is a genealogy of Noah's descendants, and there are 70 different names that are listed as the descendants of Noah. And this is a lineage of all humanity. Much later, in the book of Genesis, in chapter 46, we read another genealogy. And this is the genealogy of all of Jacob's descendants. If you remember, Jacob was the person who was given the name Israel. So this is the ancient lineage of the Jewish people. And there are 70 names there as well. And the interesting thing about this is that it suggests that the diversity among the Jewish people is as great as the diversity among all humanity. 70 names for the genealogy of all humanity. 70 names in the genealogy of Jacob's descendants of Israel. So I'm going to wrap it up since I've lost my last page to my sermon. Shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. Just to say that within this story that we thought was just, for some of us, thought was just about, a vindictive God killing people because they make mistakes, is not really dealing with that issue. It's dealing with the issue of our interrelatedness with every other person on this planet. And that our interrelatedness never ignores or tries to cover over our diversity and our differences. And that's the covenant. Right relationship amongst all humanity. There are no others that are excluded from this great circle of relationship that includes us all.
And now, in celebration of rainbows and covenants and connections, let us give generously to our church and to our community. Let us join in the blessing of our gifts. O God, through the offering of these gifts, may we become a more open people, open-minded in hearing your word and wisdom, open-hearted in healing a broken world, open-handed in heeding your call for charity and enacted love. With thanks for all good gifts, we present a portion of our substance and the whole of ourselves. Amen.
Amen. Please be seated. At this point in the service, I invite us all into a few moments of sharing our joys and our concerns with the community. If there's anything you'd like to share, please get my attention. I'll bring the microphone to you. And if there's any way in which we might be able to respond to you in solidarity, let us know by ending with a phrase that we can repeat after you, like, thanks be to God, God hear our prayers, blessed be, or whatever. Is there anything that folks have to share this morning? Kristen.
While we have the rainbow in our minds, I just want to thank you for that sermon and share with everyone just a few words that came to me as I was sitting here, because there's one other promise that the rainbow makes to us, and it's often forgotten. And it is what I wrote, because it just came, was this is also the promise of the rainbow, given as a message from the great spirit of life. When a rainbow comes into view and shines in the sky before you, no matter if the colorful bow appears in whole or double or just a small part, it tells you this: truly, wherever you are in your world right now, you are in the right place. Be confident at least of that, dear heart. That's what we can think when we see a rainbow. At least we know we're in the right place at the right time. Because if we don't see a rainbow and it's happening out there somewhere, we're just not in the place to see it. But when we see one, what a gift. It's a miracle. So thanks be to God for rainbows.
Thanks be to God. Thanks, Kristen. Diane.
I just want to give thanks for Tammy and Liberta being here, and it's just wonderful. It moved me so much I was in tears. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. If there's nothing else that folks wish to share at this time, I invite us all to join together in a brief moment of silent prayer. After a little bit of time has gone by, I'll invite us all to join together in saying this new paraphrased version of the prayer of Jesus that is printed in the bulletin. Let us join together now in silent prayer. Great Spirit, we thank you for so many rainbows after so many storms. We thank you for the promise and for the hope that we might live into the reality that every human being is our relative, that we are connected with all creation, and that you remember the goodness of it all and wait for us to join in blessing the world, asking no less than championing the full humanity of all people and creating a world of peace and justice where all may thrive. Hear us now as we say this new version of that ancient prayer that our brother Jesus taught us to pray, saying, Eternal Spirit, earth maker, pain bearer, life giver, source of all that is and that shall be, Father and Mother of us all, loving God, in whom is heaven. The hallowing of your name shall echo through the universe, the way of your justice to be followed by the peoples of the earth. Your heavenly will be done by all created beings. Your commonwealth of peace and freedom sustain our hope and come on earth. With the bread we need for today, feed us. In the hurts we absorb from one another, forgive us. In times of temptation and test, strengthen us. From the grip of all that is evil, free us. For you reign in the glory of the power that is love, now and forever. Amen. This is a time for any announcements we have to make. I wanted to say earlier, and I forgot until now, want to thank Lamont Wilsey for leading the service last Sunday. Really appreciate that whole experience you brought to us about listening. Also, there's some announcements in the bulletin. On Tuesday, a link will be going out to a pre-recorded meditation service for you to enjoy at your leisure. And on Wednesday, we've got our first chapel fundraiser of the year, concert Inscapes, featuring yours truly. I'll be playing piano music by Bach and Brahms and Debussy and Ravel, and an original composition and some Joplin rags as well. So I hope you can join us, 7 o'clock. We're asking for a suggested donation of $25 to $50 a person, but it is a donation. No one is turned away for giving less. No one is turned away even if they can't give anything. Afterwards, there will be a reception right here in what we're calling the annex of the sanctuary now. And I can't wait to see what Jennifer and Greg are going to do to create our lovely little reception area on Wednesday. So I hope you'll join us and invite all your friends. And then on Thursday, we've got our book group meeting at 1:30 in the afternoon via Zoom. Are there any announcements that you folks have to make? All right then, I invite all who are able to stand and join in singing our closing hymn, number 729, O Day of Peace That Dimly Shines. May you go forth this day as people of a rainbow covenant to share your light, your beautiful colors with all you meet, to welcome what others have to share with you, to affirm our undeniable connectedness with all people, and to create a world of love and peace and justice for all. Go forth this day in peace. Amen.